Okay, in this, I guess, lesson for the Corny Project class, several of you have brought to the class just a number, I guess a plethora. You just don't get to use plethora very often, so I just had to use them. You just bring a vast array, multivariate portfolio, if you will, of all these various constructs, and now you've learned, you're able to sort that out. You know their categories, and you're noticing that there's a pattern of evidence there, or a pattern according to which it's engaged. You have a young versus old, but as you've now learned the approach to take as far as an instructor or as far as a person in a covenant relationship, you want to first go to the foundation, the landmark of all of our basis of study and knowledge, which is to remember that the Bible alone is infallible and everything else is fallible. So the approach you've been taught and done very well with is evaluate it, define, document, and disclose the fallible elements within old earth assertion and young earth assertion. For example, there's multiple gap theories, so learn and enjoy evaluating it. Often you've noticed that people are asserting something based on having been primed positively or negatively. That is, they're told horrible things about old earther, or they're told horrible things about young earthers. And it's just, villains on both sides, and you're taught to vilify the villain. It doesn't occur to people, as you all have come to realize, that they're saying the same thing. Even their accusations are from the word categorized, and they don't know that they're just categorizing each other, vilifying the other. And it seems to be what the majority of the energy is, as I told you all about the fact that in our universe 2/3 of energy is dark energy. So most of the energy in religion, the field of religion, will just use the broad category. The field of religion is negative energy. It's all about vilifying. And I taught you all, for example, the young versus old. You don't have to pick either one of those. Once you define, document, disclose fallible elements in each of those assertions, you'll be reminded of instantaneity, Genesis 1:1. You'll be reminded of what happened in Genesis 1:2, Ha-Yah, H 1961. And I taught you about how that's, when it's inflected, it's a Cal perfect third feminine singular, Ha-Yatha, simple action. It refers to something happened. So you don't really have to explain to people whatever it is they're talking about, because they've got all these cut and paste arguments or negations against what they might call a gap theory, and you're still on text, and they don't notice you're on text, and you're using the text and following the text. So they won't have an answer or an appreciation for when angels and the war in heaven and the fall of Lucifer, when he then fell and became what we know as Satan. They won't have any place for that. They'll just say somewhere, anyway, it's just overworking it, which is fine. It's really nothing you can do about it, especially when whatever the contemporary or the moment, it's like live streaming, whatever as the pendulum swings, whatever the thing that's moving and everyone's jumped on that bandwagon, then you'll just see more and more where people just go back and cut and paste, but they will not have studied for themselves. And you'll notice that very quickly when you have a conversation. For example, I'm speaking with you all right now, no notes, and I don't have the room rigged up with whatever, and I don't have the multiple screenshots where I can show what's, whatever you call that, where people call up several things on the screen. So you'll notice they can't really have a conversation, nor do they want one. It's a strange thing, because we have people here, I call it the orthodox box. For them, when they walk into this box here, they're really about all they're interested in is orthodoxy here. But I notice on their social media, they don't vilify people who actually teach heresies. They don't vilify people who teach damnable doctrines. They don't go out and charge other religious societies, religious organizations, theistic traditions on social media, it's somehow when they get in their box, all these people go into their boxes on Sunday, and they really have a lot to say about what other people believe, but never to each other. So I don't know how they make disciples, and I think that even they know that whatever that is, that lust to vilify and to negate and have all that hate spewed out, is certainly nothing that they would do face to face, where they work with people. Let's say they work in the medical system, or they work in the school system, or they work in police, fire, they work in retail, they work in manufacturing. They never even occurs to them to misbehave as they consider what they do in their box misconduct outside the box. So I noticed, as I've told you all in this class, that how would you make a disciple, since we're not here to categorize, we're here to evangelize. And how would you then apologize, which is to give a rationale? So we apologize, we give a rationale. But that's why when you come to this class, I'm not charging you all and charging you with all this priming and getting you all charged up so you can go out and release all that negative energy. Because first, we now know people don't do that. They don't go into their workplace. They would perish the thoughts. Seldom do I hear feedback from people how they've even spoken with their own families about the differences in their beliefs. I've talked to people who are related to each other and here in this fellowship and find out that something one member of the family might be concerned about doctrinally is nothing they've ever discussed with another member of their own family. So whatever that is, that's fine. It's just reality. But for example, we had feedback when different churches came here, and I guess the one that was really fascinating was when the ABA seminaries or churches or whatever you want to call whatever moved first, when they left, let's say, old earth and moved quickly to young earth. It really wasn't that quick of a move. It had been set in motion, slow and easy, and then finally it came to fruition. And there was a strong break from what was once adamantly affirmed to now what is adamantly affirmed. But people would come here, and as I would tell you, that they'd never considered evaluating. And as I said, that's a practice in the Bible. We're always evaluating, never negating. Now, it's not a skill that's called for. There's no demand. People really respect someone that tells it like it is. And when I hear that, I still chuckle, because it's like, tell it like it is. Like, what are we talking about? Well, now, if you're preaching the gospel and about the death and the burial and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, about his faithfulness, his willingness to fulfill the law, fulfill all righteousness, which was presupposed by his willingness to not even consider retaining equal ranks with God, but rather to empty himself to the status of a bondslave and to remain faithful unto death, even the death of the cross, and to fulfill the law by being cursed, hanged on a tree and cursed, and receive the object of all the demands of the law, all the wrath and adjudicated outstanding penalties, if you will, against mankind. And it was all placed on him as the only sin bearer, the only one who would pay back that. He restored that which he did not owe. He paid back that which he did not owe. The just one died for the unjust. He came to be a sin offering for us. He knew no sin. Now, if you're telling that like it is, preach away. And if you want to preach about the return of Christ, great. But as I've taught you all, when you hear people use a text like 1 Thessalonians 4:17 and they mention the rapture there, well, that's referring to something that occurs simultaneously. The return, the resurrection of the dead in Christ will be raised first, then we which are alive, the remaining ones, you might call those the survivors, will be seized away simultaneously together with them. So good dispensationalists, which I'm not smart enough to be a dispensationalist. I've never studied that, so you'll have to be patient as I venture into that someday. They can show you where there's another place in the Bible where Paul speaks of being changed in a twinkling of an eye, what we call the resurrection. They're speaking there without tribulation. So their assertion is, in their conjecture according to dispensationalism, is that that's a rapture event that's not tied to the event that actually takes place when Christ returns and stops the tribulation, which is cut off. And as I taught you, you won't hear people talk about the cutoff. You won't hear people that talk about pre-trib or mid-trib or post-trib having a rationale for futurism, because they like I was born into the world in a place perhaps like in this region and area where pre-trib was already being taught. Futurism was already assumed, and there was never any call for anyone here to give a reason for it. As I said, you've seen people come here and just demand a position on the rapture and have no interest in the rapture, the doctrine, how was it developed, what's the origin of it. They certainly don't want to evaluate it, define, document, disclose fallible elements in it. But as I taught you all, when you do that, that's how you learn the Bible. You know the difference between the fallible and the infallible. You learn that from, and then again, I've told you all how many people came here touting the KJV until they found out that we expected that we had an expectation that they must know how to use it, but then we would hear them say things that were just as erroneous as if they had never had a King James Bible. So that was demonstrated that users of KJV are certainly not those who tout the KJV. So I know how hard it was to learn how to use the King James Bible. So, and I also know for a fact, and it's irrefutable, that no one out there, because of their ESV, New American Standard, NIV, or whatever else they're out touting, has presented any information that resolves the flummoxes between fallible constructs. No one said, well, because of the ESV, we now are no longer Calvinists. We now know the fallible elements in Calvinism. No, you won't hear that. So obviously translations have no correlative or are not causative, not causative in people abandoning their constructs for the insight they glean from that. So, but here I'll just give you the final word, so I don't want to belabor, but here for you all of you came here from some type of tradition where unless you're an original convert like me, you all already had been primed according to closed communion with augments called strict or restricted. And when I taught you all that it wasn't until we moved our Lord's Supper to the morning service where the church was here, and until we addressed the absence of a doctrine of distribution, because the variables were endless. You remember I told you all some people would stand in a circle, some people would come back at a different night of the week, others would come back that Sunday night, others would dismiss their service and then regather after they would be assured that guests had left so that they wouldn't hurt anybody's feelings or offend anybody or upset anybody. And I told you all that that was very disappointing, because what an opportunity they had to watch and to see one of the Lord's churches as we, with great honor and dignity and the highest honor we could give Christ, watch us do that. Well, I learned from the feedback. Now, albeit it may have been accusations, that is, their motive may have been to accuse or vilify. That's just, remember I told you in Egyptianity you're caught to catch, and in Christianity we're taught to teach. So if they thought they caught us, that was fine. Ironically, it's the church who is the one we're subject to, that is the head of the church, Christ, in judgment, and yet our church seemed to be the one always being judged, which was okay. But by listening carefully, I think I really demonstrated to you all that what was at stake was bigger than what we'd have to endure. So if you don't appreciate feedback, even negative feedback, which most of feedback out there is negative, and their motives, they may not even fully understand. Some people think it is Christianity to go out and charge, accuse, negate, to vilify, to castigate, to diminish, to ridicule. That just seems to be, so as in politics. Instead of people sitting down together to have the greater outcome, there's a lot of expense to the citizens of the United States while the partisanship continues to navigate the troubled waters. The only problem is it might be better if the partisanship sank and the waves of hate just kind of quelled and we were on calm seas. But that won't happen, not in this lifetime. Now, there will be a day when Jesus returns, And well, anyway, the longer story short was, you now see that the church here, unlike a lot of places you all have told me about, actually eats the Lord's Supper. And now we aren't chargeable because no one really knows what square hole to place this circle. They had never seen a husband take cup and bread to his wife and then to his baptized children. They never saw a father take it to his children, his baptized children. They never saw a pastor step out of the pulpit and take cup and bread to his wife. And our other three pastors at the table at the front beneath the pulpit, they never saw a pastor go over to his wife and then as a husband to her, and then as a father to his children go to his baptized children. They never saw brethren go to a sister who might be unaccompanied, or they never saw a brother go to the table and take cup and bread and receive it as one who's examined himself, self-corrected, and is supportive of that divine order of creation, which is the thesis sentence in the 11th chapter of Corinthians, which speaks of authority and speaks of God as the head of Jesus, Jesus is the head of every man, and the husband the head of the wife. It demonstrates the relationship of Christ and the church and shows a woman submitting herself to her husband, a husband loving his wife like Christ loved the church and gave his life for her. So there's good outcomes if you can endure the Egyptianity and recognize, as I've taught you all before, don't assume that they always have malice, or don't assume that their desire to vilify us or castigate or categorize comes from, it doesn't necessarily originate with them. They may just be carrying on the old tradition according to which they've been habituated. Now, I don't mean to say that excuses it. I'm saying for you all in this Cornet Project class, it's for you to be able to press through and stay true to evaluating these fallible assertions, to improve your knowledge, close the knowledge gap between the fallible and the infallible, and to improve your performance, because we only have this lifetime, which is how precious and how much we should treasure it, to conduct as one of the Lord's New Testament churches under his headship. And then people notice the formative power of Landmark Missionary Baptist Church, for example, is from Christ. I've taught you about how people are bantering between cessation or continuation of spiritual gifts, but you notice what was missing, the implication of the perfection of the perfected test, that is, the testimony of Christ had become perfected. Now, what's the implication in the context in that church letter? Well, you all know what it is, and I've taught you what it is. But listen to the banter. There's continuationism, which first, that isn't historically correct. They're actually teaching restorationism because a little over a century ago, when they were reintroducing spiritual gifts, they were announcing that they had been returned, so that their restorative movement, since they adjudged the Lord's churches, they adjudicated them as failures, they then were touting that the Lord has returned and restored gifts and returned them. So they actually are teaching that they've resumed, but now you'd have to read their own history. Now remember, they don't read that, so they just teach continuationism, and others, on the other hand, regrettably only say cessationism. But before you jump into that, you've all been taught better and know better. You're critical thinkers, you have skills and aptitude. Well, you notice that they left out and omitted the implication of the perfected testimony of Christ. So that's just some of the things we'll be talking about as I remind you and iterate to you what gain and what good comes from it, what glory goes to God, what good comes to each of us in the new covenant. And it'll also help you appreciate the willingness to listen when someone, even if they're attacking or again charging, categorizing, what you'll listen, if you'll listen carefully and train your ear to hear, you'll start noticing that they don't even know and understand what they're asserting. And you'll also remember, I told you the science of that is that when a person, for example, fight, flight, or freeze, and we know our neocortex just gets turned off, our hippocampus, which I remind you, just think of a campus on a playground where you had all these experiences. Well, our hippocampus is our stored experiences. So we're trying to now interpret something with our neocortex, but it's starting to shut down because we ran back to the campus where the last time this happened we're not going to let it happen again. Well, next thing you know, our amygdala is what we call it, sending all that adrenaline through that hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis that I told you about. So here we are, even in conversation, we're thinking, oh, I'm going to win this argument this time. Oh, no, I'm going to get you first. And they can't really even be cognizant on a cognitive level and mentally engage dialogue through logic. They can't two logics. You're not really, you're logical and they're illogical. You're favorably disposed, they're ill disposed. You are the one asked to be patient, as the scriptures teach you all, I told you about. You all are the ones with fruit of spirit, love, joy, peace, patient endurance, gentleness, goodness, meekness, temperance, and let the accusations flow freely, because treat them like your client, as I taught you all, and we're a consultant. We take a consultative approach. So we're counselors, we hear, we listen, we want to understand first before we want them to understand us. Seek first to understand. And this is how we'll continue to make disciples, because it's the way disciples are made in the Bible. So that's enough, but escaping this, if you will, how to exit this Egyptianity, this constant pendulum swinging, that dynamic of it, is to first learn and then listen. And then, like in this lesson, I love sharing testimonies of how we've improved. We improved, not we didn't improve the Bible. We improved our knowledge of that which is infallible. Our practice, and like I said here at Landmark, we're now practicing first and learning why and gaining a rationale as that follows because we can first do right and then learn more and do more right. So you have a blessed day.